Welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast, where thoughtful estate planning, mindfulness, and expert guidance converge. I'm your host, Sarah Eckline, a California licensed professional fiduciary deeply dedicated to guiding families through the intricate journeys of estate planning, trust administration, and end-of-life care. Join me as we explore the essentials of crafting a legacy that truly reflects your values and wishes. From understanding the complexities of estate planning documents to embracing the profound emotional aspects of end-of-life care, I'm here to provide practical advice and compassionate guidance. In each episode, we'll share heartfelt insights from experts in law, finance, and healthcare, as well as personal stories from individuals who have bravely navigated their own legacy of love journeys. Whether you're just beginning to consider your legacy or facing challenging family dynamics that call for clarity and compassion, the Legacy of Love podcast offers invaluable resources and unwavering support. I'm Sarah Eckline, inviting you to join me in exploring how love, thoughtful planning, and compassion and empathy can shape the legacies that we live and leave. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with a very special guest whose work has profoundly impacted both my life and the lives of many others. Our guest is Catherine Ravois, the founder of the Center for Richer Living, which she established in 2007 as a vibrant teaching community. Catherine is a distinguished neuroscience educator, published author, family constellations facilitator, artist, and ordained minister. As a relational neuroscience counselor for leaders, Catherine combines the practices of epigenetics, constellation work, and resonant language. This integrative approach helps people heal their brains by becoming less reactive to stress and emotional pain that hijacks our well-being. This work has remodeled not only Catherine's life, but my life, and she is delighted to help others shift from being self-critical to making their brains a happy place to live. She knows this process works because it continues to work for her. While it might not seem obvious at first, how we show up in our lives and relationships is deeply connected to how we cultivate a meaningful legacy. When I work with clients during the planning phase, it's clear that this connection extends to our estate planning. If we have dysfunctional relationships, it's likely that our estate plan will also have issues. And I've seen too many cases over the years where these issues have led to prolonged legal battles, and it's not surprising given the underlying dysfunction. So, by gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves, our families, our communities, we truly have the power to change the world and leave it in a better place. And for this reason, I wanted to have this meaningful conversation with Catherine. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as we did. Catherine Ravois, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm happy you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here, Sarah.
Oh, well, before we dive into this conversation, I would love for you to just start off with people getting a sense of why you do the amazing work that you do and what brought you here.
Well, I would label the work that I do as helping people make their brains a happy place to live, which I don't think that there's a course for that anywhere. And I just spent a lifetime moving from one healing modality or teaching to another, and then finding something more wonderful and taking what I had and moving that forward and adding to what I had and mixing it up and throwing stuff out. And here I am. So, how did I get here? I've been on a path, I think, since I was 20, and now I'm in my mid 70s.
Oh, well, I love that. So, your work, what I love is it really makes so much sense. You make us and our minds make so much sense. And when I think of you and your work, the word of courseness comes. So this of courseness for me has brought so much healing to myself, and I think also to kind of my, my family system and my, intimate relationships. Can you expand upon this word of courseness?
Sure. I can't remember whether I made up the word or not. I might not have. So I'll just say that. One of the foundations of the work that I do to help people make their brains happy is to put pieces of the puzzle together of why our lives make sense. And they do. Everything about our life that we think is a mystery or really bad luck or some curse of some kind or really good luck, it all comes from really the beginning. And I would describe that as that we're born into a family system that has a rule book for belonging. And we understand what we need to do in order to belong in our families by the time we're 4 months old.
Mm.
We can read the energy of our caregivers. We can't talk. We can't hardly move. We have no cognition, but we have our nervous systems. And we can, at as early as 4 months old, I believe it's a lot earlier actually, if our primary caregiver cannot tolerate or cannot meet us in our emotional expression, like if we are angry, I mean, we're born with these circuits of emotion that are up and running and ready to go. And one of them is rage. I mean, you've probably heard a raging baby. They're not mad at someone because they don't even have that cognition, but they're mad that
Mm.
they're not being fed or they're tired or wet or whatever that is. So if our natural expression of emotion are not met and resonated with or even tolerated, then what happens is that we turn down the volume on those emotions. Like for example, in my family, anger was not allowed. So nobody got angry, nobody got to raise their voice. And it wasn't like there wasn't anger because it was like seething and steaming under the carpet, but you couldn't talk about it and you couldn't express it. So I turned that volume down on that emotion. And of course, it has a consequence. I grow up avoiding anger myself, my anger and other people's anger, just leaving the room if somebody gets upset about something. And so, in that way, my life makes sense. It makes sense that I would avoid anger, that I would need to have it go underground. And I think one thing that I've learned, one of the thousands of things I've learned by doing this work, is how incredibly impactful our family's system is on our bodies, on our choices, on our behavior, on every part about us. And we don't talk about it in our culture.
Very true. I know we don't. I mean, that very much resonates. I think that you're not alone in that kind of family system. I think especially in the US, not allowing to have that full expression of anger, especially for women. I mean, we see that themes. The other emotion that has been coming up for me and coming up, especially having these conversations on the podcast, is not really having room around sadness and grief. And when I'm working with families, whether it's the loss of a loved one or even, maybe that person hasn't passed yet, but maybe has a horrible diagnosis, has been referred to hospice or is struggling with like Alzheimer's or dementia, there's obviously a lot of grief and loss around that person, even though they're still, with us. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all, but I think the more that I allow for that feeling to kind of be present for me, whether that's in my personal life or also showing up professionally. Grief has been an absolute kind of layer and piece that I, really didn't acknowledge for so long.
Mm, yes. And I'm glad you brought that up because grief is such one of those parts of our culture that we sweep under the rug, especially if you're a male person in our culture. It's like for women, anger is so not acceptable. For men, grief and fear are pretty unacceptable. So there's eight basic emotions that run through our brain, kind of like different bus lines that
Mm,
carry different experiences of these emotions that we are hardwired with and from the very beginning. And one of those emotions is called panic grief. And that's
mm,
the bus line that carries sadness and it carries mourning and it carries loss and it also carries aloneness, which
mm,
is something that we also don't talk about in our culture and something that is really up for us globally right now because we're in a epidemic of loneliness. Even with our teenagers, they're home on their devices and not interacting with other teenagers. And there's depression, there's, a lot more suicidality. And so, this notion of this circuit, which we need to be up and running, we need all of our circuits to be up and running in order for us to
mm,
be in full expression. And so, when we're mourning something, whether it's the loss of someone or if it's the loss of a relationship or a beloved pet or whatever, then what we're mourning is the gap between how the world is and how we would like it to be.
mm,
So sometimes when we have a relationship with a parent and either they're very sick or they've recently died, there's like a double mourning
mm,
if we don't have a healthy, clean, loving, communicative relationship with them. Then we're mourning the loss of this person like a parent and we're also at the same time mourning the loss of a relationship that we
mm.
maybe didn't have or was dysfunctional. So we can get hit with a double whammy.
That makes so much sense. And again, I'm just going to come back to that word of coarseness that I associate with you because I don't know when I use that word I feel this overall sense of relief and ease throughout my body and welcoming and inviting listeners along on this journey, not just listening, but physically experiencing kind of our conversation. So, we touched upon the two circuits, right? We talked about anger and grief. What are the other six?
Well, the mother of all circuits is our seeking circuit. And
Mm,
that's the circuit that motivates us. That's the circuit that gets us to go shopping for food or finding a new job or looking for drugs or finding a partner or, you know, getting up to do anything. We need our seeking circuit because it motivates us forward. If our seeking circuit is not up and running, then what that's called is depression where we can't move forward. So there's our seeking circuit, there's our grief circuit, there's our fear circuit,
mm,
there's our rage circuit, there's our play circuit, there is our care circuit, and when care and play are working together, then it's very much fun.
mm,
There is our sexuality slash emergence circuit. which comes on when we're moving into adolescence. And we're aware of all the hormonal things that happen to us as adolescents, but what we don't really examine in our culture is that this is the time when our true self starts to emerge, when we stop seeing our parents as all powerful and all knowing, and we begin to find our own way in this world. So that emergence comes through around that time of anywhere between 11 and 14, different for boys and girls often, and they're happening at the same time, which is kind of like a another double whammy for the teenagers and for the parents. So there's that circuit, and then there's another circuit that my teacher Sarah added. This research was done by a man named Jaak Panksepp, and he's the one who researched these circuits of emotion and motivation. And my teacher, Sarah Payton, has followed him very carefully. And right before he died, he was researching this other circuit, which is the disgust circuit. And
Mm.
it has its own pathway, it has its own bodily feelings. We all know what it feels like to have disgust. And it's a circuit that protects us from people harming us or from eating bad things or from vermin. And so this is also one of the circuits that I name it as a circuit. He didn't, but he died, a couple of years ago, right as he was doing this research.
So from my understanding with all of these circuits which do relate to our all the rainbow of emotions that we can feel, the work is really to allow kind of full expression and full acknowledgement for all of these emotions. And of course what comes up with that is like what the world that we live in, and then there's the world that we live in, which there's so much no and not okayness and not this of courseness.
Yes.
So I think that this is where, I mean, for me, as a now as a parent, as a new
Yes.
mom doing this work, and also also as a as a professional fiduciary serving families through times of grief and loss and matriarchs and patriarchs passing and kind of the next stepping in line. This work, I think, has just been kind of core to my internal work, but what I invite others along this journey and path is, when we're thinking about planning and when we're thinking about legacy, it's so much more than just wealth that we're passing down. It is, like you just said, with this of courseness, understanding our family systems and what we're brought up in very much informs our realities, our internal world, and our internal experience. And that very much so is what is passed down to that next generation. So, with this kind of awareness, what are some tools that you like to bring in to support families, support individuals in I guess for me, I can see where it could feel like a disconnect, where we live in this world where there's not this okayness with this full range. Yeah, this is what really I think we each need.
Yes. I think with your bringing up of courseness, as we understand how our brains work and how our brains connect with other brains, it's easier for us to be able to have of courseness about our families, about our family
Mhm.
systems, about, why Aunt Betty is trying to control the whole thing and thinks
Mhm.
that she knows exactly what needs to be done, during this time of family transition when it's really none of her business and what are we going to do? And so we can look at that and we can basically say, Well, I don't understand why she's doing what she's doing, but I can understand that it makes sense in some universe. And I'm thinking of you as a parent, Sarah, and with a small child, you know, and I'm thinking of my own parenting and how I did not have the resources to be able to say to my young child, of course you're having a tantrum right now. It
Hmm.
doesn't come out of nowhere. You have unmet needs. You have something to express that needs to be expressed, and you want me to hear it. But I'm so frazzled and I'm so, you know, in such reactivity because I'm late and we're trying to get in the car and I've got to go to work and you're just sitting there screaming at me. You know, it takes a regulated brain to be able to sit patiently and think, of course, sweetheart, you're having a tantrum. You didn't sleep last night, or there was too much activity, and it's more than is healthy for you. And so we can see if we can kind of take little X-ray glasses and look through our family system and make sense out of why people are the way they are, then I think that can help us calm down and not be reactive about it.
Yes. And the other thing that kind of comes up is the more that we kind of practice this for ourselves, I
Yes,
find that the more that we're using that muscle and we can provide that for others, right? And you use different language, but kind of what comes up for me is practicing like loving kindness and compassion,
yes,
of bringing that again, this of courseness to our lives. To me, it makes it that much easier to practice that of courseness, and that loving compassion and kindness to others, even though it can be hard.
yeah. And boy, it can be hard. But I think one of the foundations of the work that I do is the study of resonant language skills, which I learned from originally from nonviolent communication, which is the work of
Mhm.
Marshall Rosenberg. He's easy to find online, he's easy to find YouTube videos. And it's basically about how we can approach other people and ourselves with the intention to connect. I think that's like the bottom line of it. I think of resonance in how are we touched or moved by being with someone's expression and how that expression affects us. So resonance is a process of co-regulating our brain, and it's a delicious co-regulation. I mean, everything about our life is about relationality. Everything involves, if you think about your life, what you do during the day, what you do at night, who you hang out with, who are in your different circles of friendship, who you see when you go to the grocery store. It's all about relationality. And resonant skills help us to reach out to listen to others, not for the purpose of providing our unsolicited advice or brilliant wisdom, but for the purpose of understanding.
Mm.
So I would ask you, you would say, oh gosh, I had it, I had a really hard day. And I might ask you what your feelings are. And you might say, oh, I'm feeling really sad and frustrated. And then I might wonder what need of yours is not being met because of those feelings. So, do you have a need for a childcare provider that allows you to feel totally at ease about going off to work every day and doing what you need to do so that your child is being cared for and you don't have to think about it. So
Mm.
I'm wondering what it's like to be you. And as you tell me, you say, well, you know, it's not exactly sadness. It's more like I feel like I'm the only one here. I feel like I'm the only one that's doing all the work. And then I might say, oh, is it aloneness? And then you might say, yeah, it's aloneness. And then when that happens, our brains are connecting. I'm like taking your brain in to understand you, and you are hearing me understanding you. And this is an exchange of energy that is very nourishing for our brains.
Mm. You spoke to that so well because my initial experience with nonviolent communication was many years ago. I lived in community with 10 people. And so nonviolent communication was really kind of how, when we had house meetings and when we needed to bring up conflict, one of the tools that we used. And I can say that, I mean, it's definitely a skill for me, like when I was first being exposed to it, and still when I'm really sitting down and using nonviolent communication, you really need to think about it and kind of flex that muscle because it's
Yes,
not kind of how most people talk and communicate their
right.
experience. But what I've found, especially in kind of highly charged, contentious situations, that it can totally disarm someone. And a conversation where, you know, maybe both people initially are going into like very charged and coming in with all the big feelings and emotions of I've done wrong. If one person at least is coming in with the intention of using this tool and to really understand that opportunity for like connection and deeper understanding and coming to resolution, there's definitely not a guarantee, but I see that it's one step closer, maybe many steps closer.
Yes, I think that's a really good point that you're making. And I'm imagining, not being in your field of work, but I'm imagining that when people are dealing with estates and you know what's going to go where and who's going to get what, that they have very strong feelings
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
very strong feelings. And sometimes when we don't have our care circuit moving in in terms of the big picture of our family system, we can kind of railroad ourselves right through using our left hemisphere, which doesn't see emotions, it doesn't see
Mm.
other souls, it just wants to get the job done. It's very black and white, and it's like, this is the way it's got to be, or this is what's true. My way is the right way. And that's kind of coming from a left hemisphere or instrumental brain, we like to call it, to try to solve a problem that involves a lot more than black and whiteness.
Mm.
So when we're using resonant language, what we're doing is we're inviting our right hemisphere in, which is our relational brain. And our right hemisphere has the ability to feel feelings and to understand that other people might have other perspectives and to be able to approach it a little bit more holistically. And just by using resonant language, just by saying to somebody that's kind of like charging in with their opinion and their perspective in a very black and white way, just by saying, I'm wondering if you have a need for stability or if you have a need for resolution
Mm.
that is financially stable for you. And when people ask us these questions and they nail it, or we nail it, or we say, no, it's not like that, it's like this, our brain comes down.
Mm.
when somebody names the truth for us, I don't have any patience about this. Oh, do you have a need to get this done right away?
Mm.
And then they can sometimes calm down a little bit, not always, but what we're doing is we're introducing the possibility of them understanding that we're trying to get where they are, that we're trying to understand where they're coming from.
That really, honestly, it really makes sense, and also makes sense with the work that I do. And I think very much of why I think it's important, and why I kind of lead with mindfulness, just even in my own company's branding, why that word resonated. Sometimes I tell, just people interested in my services, the numbers piece, like the actual administrative part of the job when I'm like acting as someone's trustee or power of attorney, to me that is the easy part. The hard part is dealing with, sometimes you're dealing with a whole family system. What I find more so than not is that there's typically some level of dysfunction. That's usually why a professional might be needed. And coming and relating with, these individuals from a place of understanding, a place of collaboration, a place of kind of welcoming and inviting kind of everyone to the table, I find that you know that disarms people. And it also, I think, is kind of the harder job to do, because everyone's so unique and different. And sometimes people have really, horrible experiences. Not only are they grieving, but it's that, what you were saying before, that double grief of, oh, I'm not getting what I want in the here and now, but I'm also losing this relationship and this person, and sometimes the relationship that they never had or wanted.
Right. And then just on top of that, I'm not getting what I want here,
Yeah.
and I never have gotten what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I am living in a pattern of not getting what I want
Yes.
because this family has always excluded me.
Yes.
And now I am pissed, or I am so sad that I'm collapsed, you know, or and I'm not going to talk to anybody because here we go again. This is the family system that often gets put into place where people are in different roles. One person is the savior. One of the children saves the family by being responsible for everybody. One of the children is the rebel. That would be me. One of the children is the victim, and one of the children is unhealthy for one reason or another. And then it's like everybody's playing their roles, and often they continue to play the roles.
I'm glad you spoke to that, these roles, because I think that maybe goes in nicely into like family constellations, and maybe just sharing, a bit about that. When I was first introduced to family constellations, the woman that I was working with shared this, and it stayed with me. I'd be interested to know your take on. But she said, in a dysfunctional family, everyone has that role to play, and there's like a requirement and a necessity for each individual to play that role. And in a healthy family system, there's room for growth and evolution, and space for people to decide who they want to be. There's not this need and requirement. So I don't know if that, if we're speaking the same language, if you would say things different, but even as I start, my family or my new family of having children, that's kind of always been in the background for me, of like something like a barometer to like look at, like, does it feel like there's space for my child to be who she wants to be? And am I like, I never want to be too projecting or requiring or demanding her to be a certain way.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that what were talking about in the beginning about how, everybody's playing a certain role, it's all about belonging.
Yes.
Family constellations is about belonging. As I mentioned earlier, we're born into a system. There's a rule book for how you have to behave in order to belong in this family system that is unwritten and unconscious, but you know what it is by the time you're 2 years old. You know what happens if you cry too much. You know what happens if you are very quiet. Then maybe somebody will give you attention, or if you get sick, or if you get mad, you know what's going to happen. And so what family constellations do is they help us take any life issue, doesn't matter what, and make sense of it, back to sense making, as we look through the lens of our family system and our family history. So this process takes us out of time and space. It's a, I would call it a mystical process, and it bypasses our usual cognition, and it touches deep currents of truth that have been unseen or implicit. And as we recognize long-standing energetic patterns of behavior and movement in our lives, then we can free up that energy for more choice and greater emotional health as we move forward. So, a family constellation is really to give us more choice in moving forward. It doesn't like do the work. It's
Mhm.
not like doing a psychic reading. It doesn't just tell you what to do. What happens is we take different elements of an issue or a pattern of behavior, and we kind of airdrop them into our family system and see what happens. So other people
Mm.
represent in a group constellation. Other people represent different elements of our issue. Could be a country that parents immigrated from. They could represent an emotion. They could represent money. They could represent a deep sadness. And then people step onto the field in these roles, and the person that's receiving the constellation gets to see their life play out by
Mm.
people who they don't know, they've never met before. They're just stepping onto the field. This is the mystical part. And they're allowing the energy of this field that we're in to move through them, and with incredible preciseness and accuracy. I did a constellation last night for a woman, and one of the people that represented was from India. She could barely speak English, and she didn't know anything about constellations. And she stepped into the constellation and just like spoke from the standpoint of this person's unmet needs,
Mm.
and spoke so clearly that the person just burst into tears with understanding and recognition, and it took us forward. So what one of the things that the constellation work that I do brings forth is to look at contracts, unconscious contracts that we make, sometimes as young as early infancy, to cut off parts of our authentic selves so that we can belong. Because
Mm.
belonging, being accepted, are survival tools for us as infants. So we'll do anything. If mom doesn't tolerate our anger, we'll turn it down. If mom needs us to be quiet, or dad, or whoever's our primary caregiver, doesn't matter, could be a nanny. If they need us to be quiet in order for them to be okay, then that's what we're going to do. And there's not a place where we go, okay, we're done with that now. Time to move on. No, it sticks around. Yeah. So what we're doing in a constellation is we're we're looking for these unconscious contracts that we make that trip us up later. And then we wonder, why can't I have a healthy relationship? Or why do I struggle so much with my career, or my health, or my finances, or this family? There's these entanglements that happen emotionally that we get to disentangle in relationships, in constellation work, by naming what's invisible yet so in charge.
Mm. Yes, I think with the family constellation work, I've had it done for my own family system, and I've also sat in on enough family constellations for others. And always my takeaway, well, and I will say, I think it requires you to kind of quiet that left hemisphere that needs to know, that needs to understand. And there's never been one family constellation that I've been witness to that it didn't make sense, that it didn't resonate. And there absolutely kind of is this magic that plays out. And I think the only way that I've been able to make sense of it is by really knowing kind of the truth. We're all connected to something much greater than us, whatever you want to call that. I'll let that be. But I think that the family constellation work very much is tuning into that, which we're all connected to. And I've had healings from it. And I've also been witness to many people's healings through this work. So you work with people individually on this, and you also offer a group setting. Can you kind of share what that could look like?
Sure, I offer family constellation work. We can do it individually with one. And then what I do is I draw the constellation on the whiteboard of Zoom. And there's certain advantages of doing that than doing it in person, which is like I can draw a tsunami of fear. You know,
Mm,
I can draw a line of ancestors that goes back, you know, hundreds of years that you can actually see on the field, on the whiteboard. Or we can do it with a group. And then I also do that on the whiteboard when I'm not doing it in person. Ever since the pandemic, I've been doing them on the whiteboard. And then different people step into different parts of the constellation. And
mm,
we can look at multi generations because we have this research that's relatively new, that's called epigenetics, where we carry not just the genetic makeup of our ancestors, but epigenetically we carry their emotional experience in our DNA. There's a protein sheath that surrounds our DNA that holds within it our grandparents' joys and their traumas, their immigration stuff, their parents' stuff. We hold it within our neurology. So I don't know if you've ever heard, oh my gosh, he's just like his grandfather, and he never met his grandfather, right? We
yes.
carry that within us. So those of us that are the children of people that lived through World War II, whether on the European side, the German side, or the United States side, our DNA is just filled with experiences that our ancestors lived through. And oftentimes that's very helpful as we go through our sense making and of courseness. That, of course, I would have the feeling that there's never enough for me. My
Mm,
grandmother was in a concentration camp.
mm. Yeah, I think that's, where this work is just, yeah, it's so powerful.
Yes,
While it's about us, it's also not. And one of the things that I love about you and your work, and I think one of your superpowers, is that you do have a gift for teaching, and you also have a gift of you break things down into like these micro explanations of sharing about how our brains work, on a biological level. And then you also have this ability to kind of zoom out, and you can talk about family systems and family constellations, and then you can also talk even about the collective. And I guess kind of wrapping up this conversation from where we started, this work just brings this level of deep understanding and of courseness to not only your individual lives and then your family system, but it can really expand out to the collective. And I can at least speak for myself, living in the Bay Area, living in Silicon Valley. Seems like we're all so separate and like living these little individual lives and feeling so alone. And this work for me has kind of flipped and turned the table or flipped the coin, where it's like really reminding, like, oh, no, that this is really A, what the work is, but B, that we're all so deeply connected to our past, like our past lineage and to the current state of the world, that doing this work is really giving, I think, kind of ourselves and the future generations that, I don't know, I guess possibility. I'm left with hope and possibility by doing this work.
Mm.
So I want to thank you for, this conversation, and more than just this conversation, but bringing this of courseness to my life, because it's, to me, I think that this is really how we do change the world.
I think you're right. If there was a better way, I'd be doing that. And I've spent my whole life doing that. So, I mean, I think one of the main things that I do is I counsel leaders because I want to support people that have the ability to change lives,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. To make impact. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I'm very mission driven and I want to be a contribution. So I've kind of looked around to where I can, you know, offer my best self in that way. So thank you for having me.
Anything that you would like to leave the listeners with before we wrap up today?
I'll leave the listeners with something that my spiritual teacher told me back in the mid 1970s. He said, communication won't solve all your problems, just 99% of them.
I love that. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Sarah.
You have a beautiful rest of your day.
You too. Have a beautiful rest of your life.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy of Love podcast. Please listen, subscribe, and share the show with someone you think would find it valuable. Let's stay connected. You can find me on LinkedIn, and if you're interested in professional fiduciary services, you can learn more by visiting our website at trustandhonor.co. Disclaimer: by accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that Sarah Eckline makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information provided in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Sarah Eckline does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. The third-party materials or contents of any third-party site referenced in this podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Sarah Eckline or Trust and Honor, and we assume no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in the third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and or links referenced. Sarah Eckline makes no warranty that this podcast or the servers that make it available are free of viruses, worms, or other elements or codes that manifest contaminating or destructive properties.